The film opens with a beauty doctor named Laura. She has been a doctor for a long time, and many people have succeeded in becoming more beautiful thanks to her help. There is a man named Gustavo. He works as Laura's assistant, and works part-time. In addition to making ends meet, Gustavo also looks for money to pay for his studies. Gustavo has not worked there for long, and Laura doesn't really know him yet. Laura herself was once married, but their relationship had to end because of a problem. And now she decides to live alone first. Meanwhile, she also has a good friend who always accompanies her named Eduardo. He is also a doctor, and is very kind to Laura. A few days later, Laura gets a female patient named Martha, and it turns out she knows Gustavo. They used to be neighbors. The more days she works there, it seems that Gustavo slowly begins to be interested in Laura. He tries to get closer to Laura. Even when Laura had a birthday, Gustavo congratulated her and invited her to dinner together. Initially, Laura refused Gustavo's invitation, and said that she already had an appointment with someone else, who was none other than Eduardo. However, a few moments later, Eduardo contacted Laura and said that he could not have dinner with Laura, because there was a sudden job. In the end, Laura met Gustavo and accepted the dinner invitation. That evening, they ate together. There they chatted. Gustavo also said that he only lived with his grandmother, because both of his parents had died since Gustavo was little. Long story short, Gustavo took Laura home. When Laura wanted to go in, Gustavo bravely kissed Laura. And when Laura wanted to sleep, she imagined it, and imagined being intimate with Gustavo while playing alone. You know what he meant. The next day, Gustavo gave Laura a gift in the form of a painting. Besides that, he also gave her roses. Eduardo thought it was something strange, and he asked Laura to be careful. A few days later, Laura invited Gustavo to come to her house. There they chatted until late at night. But this time, Laura kissed Gustavo first and invited Gustavo to be intimate. Since then, the same incident has continued to repeat itself, both at home and at work. However, when Gustavo came to Laura's house, he met Eduardo for the first time. But Gustavo's attitude seemed strange. He was cold to Eduardo. Even when Eduardo came home, Gustavo was angry with Laura because she did not greet and hug him in front of Eduardo. Hearing that, Laura was surprised. They had no relationship whatsoever. But Gustavo had started to control himself. An argument had occurred, but in the end Gustavo apologized to Laura and they made up again, and in the end returned to push being intimate. As the days went by, Gustavo was getting more and more excessive. Laura was contacted by her neighbor and said that many items were delivered to her house. It turned out that it was Gustavo's belongings. He said that they already had a relationship and Laura was like his, so he had to stay there so that Laura would continue to be with him. While there, Gustavo kept making trouble and made Laura scared. Laura told Eduardo about it, and said that Gustavo was acting strangely. Gustavo seemed to own Laura's entire life. Everything she owned seemed to be owned by Gustavo. He also cooked and invited Laura to eat together, but Laura refused because she already had an appointment with Eduardo. As a result, Gustavo became upset because of that. Even though she was starting to be disturbed by Gustavo's actions, Laura didn't want to leave him. For Laura, Gustavo and she both needed each other. Eduardo only asked Laura to be careful, and not to turn a blind eye to Gustavo's attitude. That night, Gustavo and Laura wanted to have dinner together outside, but Gustavo was angry because he saw Laura wearing slightly revealing clothes. Gustavo even attacked Laura and wanted to force her to make out. Laura, who was scared, finally threatened Gustavo and called the police. Gustavo, who was scared, finally ran away from there, and since then Laura has never met Gustavo. But the terror continued to happen, and the first person targeted was Eduardo. Eduardo was followed by someone and immediately beat him until he was seriously injured and had to be hospitalized. He suspected that the perpetrator was Gustavo, but he was not so sure if it was true. But he also saw a bracelet that was similar to Gustavo's. When he got home, Laura found Gustavo's belongings. There she saw Gustavo's grandmother's clothes and also albums and notes during World War II. Besides that, she also found a photo of Gustavo with a woman, who she thought was his grandmother. But Laura was also not sure about that. Laura tried to find out more about Gustavo. She then met Martha and asked many things. And it turned out that the woman was not Gustavo's grandmother, during his parents' abandonment since he was little. Gustavo was cared for by the woman. They lived together and were like a couple. But in the end he had to be left by the woman because she died. Gustavo wanted to find a replacement for the woman, and Laura was the one he felt was the right one to replace her. When she got home, Laura felt something was strange in her house. She and Eduardo even called the police to check. But it seemed like it was just Laura's feeling, because no one was found there. The terror continued to happen, until one day, when Eduardo was there and Laura left for work. Gustavo suddenly appeared and attacked Eduardo. Luckily there was a police patrol, and Eduardo took advantage of it to enter the room and hide. On the other hand, Laura was treating her patient, but when her mask was removed, the person turned out to be Gustavo. Gustavo acted like a crazy person, and he also killed Laura's friends. In the end Laura was caught. She was drugged and Gustavo wanted to change Laura's face to look like her grandmother's face. Luckily Eduardo came just in time, and immediately killed Gustavo. In the end Laura was able to get away from Gustavo, and regretted what had happened. That was the plot of our film this time. Hopefully you like it, and see you again in our next film plot.